Hi, my name's Kevin Bai. I'm a violinist from Plano, Texas, and I was a part of NYO-USA during the summers of 2017, 2018, and 2019. Through NYO, I made a ton of incredible friends and memories, and I think one of the most special memories I have is actually translating for Michael Tilson Thomas on stage during a concert in Beijing. So today I'll be talking about how to carefully think about and analyze bow distribution, bow pressure, and contact point as it relates to phrasing. So not that long ago, I was a very mindless practicer. I just sort of played through pieces, and then if there were any spots I messed up, I would go back and try to work it out on my left hand and play it over and over again until I just quit because of frustration. But then I realized after several dull performances that music is not created by just playing the notes with your left hand. It's also created by constructing musical ideas in a framework, primarily using your bow. So from that day on, I began to pay more attention to my right hand technique, to my bow usage, as well as my left hand technique. Tip number one, make a plan of how you want to distribute your bow. So in music, I think we rely on mainly more abstract elements like emotions to bring a performance to life, and we rarely think about things in a more analytical manner. But I think bow distribution is one of these things that demands a more analytical approach. So oftentimes, if you don't think about how you distribute your bow, you're going to run out really quickly. But if you actually put some thought into it, bow distribution is pretty straightforward. Simply partition your bow into lengths corresponding to the number of notes in a passage and their lengths. So now I'm going to demonstrate how to make a plan to distribute your bow with just a small line from the third movement of Prokofiev's Fifth Symphony. So I'll just go bow by bow on this passage. So the first bow consists of 2 quarter notes and 2 eighth notes. So since the eighth notes are half the length of the quarter notes, you should be using half the amount of bow as you use on the quarter notes, unless you want to, of course, crescendo or decrescendo or something like that. And because there are 3 quarter notes, the equivalent of 3 quarter notes in this first bow, you can divide your bow into 3 chunks. So the first note, you would use 1/3 of your bow. And then the next note, you would use the next third of your bow. And then for the 2 eighth notes, you would use the remaining third of your bow. So I'm not going to explain how to do the rest of those 2 lines because I think it's pretty self-explanatory at this point. But this is something that at least I have to do for pretty much everything I play. Otherwise, I'm just going to be running out of bow in every other measure. Maybe for players that are more advanced than me or really, really good, this will be intuitive to them. But for someone like me, this is something I still have to do when I'm practicing. Tip number 2, think of contact points as highway lanes. So this analogy is a very common analogy, and even though contact points really is more of a product of how much bow pressure you want to put on the string and where you're playing on the fingerboard, I think it's still really helpful to be able to understand this analogy. So the 5 highway lanes on the violin are lane 1, which is right next to the bridge, lane 2, which is about here, lane 3, which is in the middle between the bridge and the fingerboard, lane 4, which is around here, and lane 5, which is basically over the fingerboard. So playing in the correct lane is in my opinion, really important to getting a clear sound when you're trying to make phrases and things like that. And if you're not making a clear sound, there are some things you could consider. For example, as you move closer to the bridge, the tension on the string gets higher. So as a result, you also need to put a little more tension on the bow as well, a little more pressure on the bow. But sometimes if you're not playing in the upper register and you put too much tension on the bow and you're in lane 1, like right next to the bridge, you're just going to make a crunch or a scratch. So generally speaking, unless you're in super high positions on the E string or something, I would stay away from being super close to the bridge. So if you're driving on a highway, you don't want to be swerving from the left to the right constantly unless you want to like crash and hit somebody. And the same thing applies to using highway lanes on the violin. When you're phrasing, I think you can't be constantly changing the lane that your bow is in, or else you're just not going to get a clear sound at all. And really, a change in the lane is more reserved for drastic changes in color as opposed to subtle phrases. What you just saw was what happens when you change bow lines like every 2 milliseconds. So now I'm going to play this again, the same part of Sibelius, while trying to stay in the same about 2 bow lanes. So yeah, the second version of the opening of Sibelius I played, in my opinion at least, was arguably much better than the first version where I just swerved my bow between the bridge and the fingerboard. And you know, I'm not here to force my opinion on anyone, but generally speaking, maintaining a more constant contact point will yield better results in sound production. Tip number 3, use a mirror. So because of the angle that I hold the violin, I'm not sure if this is the same for everyone. When I look at the fingerboard or at the strings with my eyes, there's actually a discrepancy between where I think I'm placing the bow and where I'm actually placing the bow. For example, when I think that I'm placing it in lane 2, I'm actually in lane 3. So I think it's really important to look at yourself in a mirror to make sure that what you think you're doing matches up with what you're really doing. So the hardest thing about carefully thinking about bow usage is actually just taking the time to think about it. I mean, bow distribution is nothing more than some simple math. Choosing the correct contact point is nothing more than some trial and error. And finally, just use a mirror and stare at yourself play, because don't we all love doing that already? Well, that's it, folks. Again, my name is Kevin Bai, and thank you for checking out NYO-U's playlist. Be sure to like and subscribe to the channel, and check out some other mini masterclasses on NYO-U.